Hello, this is George Whitten with Worthy News. Today is February 28th, 2023. There's a lot to cover. We're living in a day and age where the Lord talked about that deception would be everywhere, that everything around us would be deception. So it's no shocking thing as we watch the news. There's so much confusion in this day of confusion where the enemy of confusion is showing confusion in gender identity, in marriage identity, and family identity. So it makes absolute sense why there's so much confusion in the world. That's why we have to put on the mind of Messiah every single day. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about prophecy, but prophecy is not meant to freak people out. Honestly, prophecy is meant to build, encourage, and comfort. Prophecy is meant to give us and equip us to understand what we're supposed to do in this day and this age, what we're supposed to do, how to equip us, how to go ahead and be kings and priests of the Most High God when the world around us is going just a little nutty. And last week was a very interesting week. This is a story that we covered partially. It's Vladimir Putin on the day of the anniversary of the Ukraine war. He came out with this speech and said Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield. That's why an information war is being waged against us. They attack us constantly, distort history, do not respect our culture. Look at what they are doing with their countries. They destroyed the institution of family. Pedophilia is normal in their lives. They respect same sex marriage. What shall we say to them? Any grown man can live how he wants, and we don't want to get into personal life. But in the holy books, it is written that a family is a man and a woman with children. What was interesting was here was Vladimir Putin. He says this thing, and a lot of conservative commentators hailed this as a great speech. The reality is that Vladimir Putin is probably one of the most evil men on the planet. Anyone that stands in opposition to him finds himself in a grave, whether or not they've been pushed off of a building, or whether or not they've committed suicide, or whether they end up in jail. And he uses this rhetoric not really because he believes it, when he believes it partially, but he uses this rhetoric to kind of galvanize support behind him. He is a master manipulator. He was the head of the FSB, which is the Russian intelligence service. And he uses terminology. He doesn't say, but in the Bible it is written. He doesn't say in the Quran it is written. He says in the holy books. So that if you were a someone that was in Judaism, or someone that was in Islam, or someone that was a Christian, then this is an appeal to you. But we have to really be careful about what's going on now. What was interesting, the same day that this took place, they carried out the Sarmat missile, the second Sarmat missile, which is termed Satan 2, and it failed. Um, not to say the whole situation in Ukraine is good by any means. The reality is that those that are caught in the crossfire are the ones we really need prayer for. If you haven't seen my past videos on worthy.tv, watch Ukraine Wars and Rumors of Wars. And this is where I talk about the corruption of the Zelensky government. We talk about a lot of the chemical or labs that were discovered in Ukraine. And then a lot of prophecy teachers are saying this is Gog and Magog. And I explain in full detail where I believe we are in that. And that's the second video there, Perm, Gog and Magog. Where are we prophetically? Now, there's a lot of things happening right now inside of Israel right now that are mass protests. We're talking thousands upon thousands of people in the street, and it's an anti-judicial reform rally. What we have is a prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who really was forced to go to court on a lot of dubious charges. And so now he's actually waging war against the judicial system. However, I do not think this is such a great thing. If we read this and understand this properly, the third paragraph of this, the law is the second part of the government's judicial reform and is similar to the first part, is an amendment to the basic law of the judiciary. The proposal stipulates that the entire High Court, 15 justices, must vote unanimously to cancel a law, and only if the law directly contradicts a basic law. So what we have here is an interesting situation where If you've ever been to a Shabbat meal inside of Israel, I doubt that you can find, three Jews that agree on anything completely. There's a saying: if you get two Jews together, you get three opinions. To go ahead and to have a law say that it's no longer that it's not valid because all 15 have to decide on it, that's basically overriding the judiciary system. There is no more any law that's passed within the government's going to pass. There's nothing they can really do to cancel the law. So this is why I believe it's a very dangerous situation. A few weeks ago, this was on December 25th. I actually posted up a video on Worthy.watch, and it was Benjamin Netanyahu who openly bragged about how he allowed Israel to be the lab for Pfizer. And not only was he talking about being a lab for Pfizer, but then he also talked about the need to create a DNA database. Well, can you imagine if Israel passed a law that required every Israeli citizen to be vaccinated, and there was no way to stop that, or everyone needed to go ahead and submit their DNA, even if they didn't want to, and it passed? Then that's why that judicial reform is, a dangerous thing to kind of really be paying attention to and watching. Now, obviously, we're in a situation where a lot of people are excited about. The awakening has happened in Asbury. It's actually spread across the United States. Anne Graham Lotz, Billy Graham's daughter, said this could be the last great awakening. And what was interesting was that she quoted a passage in James 5. Therefore, be patient until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth. Wait patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. The early and latter rain. This is when James writes this. He's kind of pulling some things together, and he's requoting a very familiar passage, the early and latter rain. It's also used in Joel 2. Be glad, children of Zion, and rejoice in Adonai your God, for he gives you the early rain for prosperity. Yes, he will bring down the rain for you, the early and the latter rain as before. Now, the word early is the word more, and that's where you get the 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 rains that actually are in the fall, and then the Malkosh, which is the latter rain. Now, in Israel, it really is just one long rainy season, but the distinction is when the rains are provided for the fruit of the earth. And so it's kind of an interesting terminology because, and I believe this kind of plays out in a passage. The passage when Peter is in, and he stands up on the day of Shavuot, or in the New Testament, we would see the day of Pentecost. He's actually quoting Joel 2, 28 and 28 and 30. And it talks about, I will pour my spirit out on all flesh. In this passage, it actually began with the word in Joel 2:23, and that's really where the passage begins. So there was an early rain and a latter rain, as though there's something more coming. And so this same terminology is used again. And I'm going to go out and venture out on a little speculation. I'm trying not to go too far off on an extreme, but a lot of people ask, is this the last days revival? Is this the culmination of what this is talking about? Now, there's some that say there is no more revival coming. I should just submit to you that it literally speaks about the wheat and the tares grow together. And if you see the tares growing, you see the evil growing, and they haven't yet been pulled out, that means the wheat is still growing with it. And so the Lord tells us this: He's with us till the end of the age. And I believe that the Lord will not be, trumped in these last days. The Lord will not be, usurped by evil. I believe that you will see a very real distinction between good and evil. That as we approach closer and closer to the end of the age, there is no more gray area. It's either white or dark. And in this passage in Zechariah 10, it's a very interesting passage because ask rain from the Lord in the season of the spring rain. Now, this spring rain is called the Malkosh. It's the same terminology. It doesn't use the term the early rain. It doesn't use that term. So it's specifically about a time at the end. For the Lord who makes the storm clouds, he would give you them showers of rain. to everyone and to all the vegetation of the earth. And in this passage, he kind of goes through and he talks about all the liars, the deception. He goes through talking about the lack of a shepherd. And as he goes through this, he then pulls out in verse 4, from him shall come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, and from him the battle bow, from him every ruler, all of them together. Now, the first portion of that, the cornerstone, well, this is what Isaiah talks about, what Psalms talks about, and this cornerstone is the same cornerstone that Peter then talks about, where he says this Yeshua Hamashiach from Nazareth, Jesus from Nazareth, who was crucified, whom God raised from the dead. This became the cornerstone, and there is salvation in no one else. And there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. So here is a reiteration of what Yeshua told the disciples. Remember, when Yeshua was sitting down with the disciples, there was no Gentile in the room when he says to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And there's many people that support Israel that believe they have another way into the kingdom. I just do not see that in Scripture. I don't see that from the words out of Yeshua. I don't see that from the words out of this passage here in Acts. And so we have to really be careful about, why do we love Israel? We love Israel because the Bible tells us to love Israel. But the bigger thing is this: the greatest love we have for them is to show them that Yeshua is truly the Messiah. Now it says from him the tent peg. Well, if you go through this passage about the tent peg, it's kind of a connection to Isaiah 22 when it talks about the key of the house of David. He shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. He's got the keys. It says in Revelation, he's got the keys of hell and death. And I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and he will become a throne of honor to his father's house. So here was a picture of the Lord. And again, from him the battle bow. Well, obviously, it talks about a war. He that's coming in Revelation 19 is faithful and true, and he's coming and he's making war. And his name is called the Word of God. And it says, and from him every ruler. Well, he was going to rule with a rod of iron in the future. And it says that we're going to rule and reign with him. So this passage of Revelation 10:4 is obviously talking about the Messiah. It continues on in Zechariah 10 and 6 through 9, and it's talking about the redemption of Israel. And if you notice this carefully, it says, look, I'm going to bring them back to Israel. I'm going to bring them back. He has compassion on them. And it says this, they shall be as though I had not rejected them. That passage in Joel 2, it talks about, and I will destroy the years the locusts have eaten. I will replenish those years. And here's the passage here. God has not rejected his people. There's a lot of people that quote over and over again, he's rejecting. It says, and he's going to have compassion. He will go ahead as though he has not rejected them. For the Lord their God, and I will answer them. And then it says this, it continues on that passage, says, the children shall see it and be glad. Their hearts shall rejoice in the Lord. I will whistle for them and gather them in, for I have redeemed them. And they shall be as many as before, though I scattered them among the nations and to the far countries, and with their children they shall live and return. So this passage here is talking about whistling, it's talking about gathering. And if you read this carefully, it says, and I will bring them home from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. Well, this is a picture of another passage, and talks about in Isaiah 11:11 when he talks about he's recovering people a second time, and he talks about from Assyria to Egypt and to all these places, and the regathering of Israel. Though it is not the restoration of Israel, because the restoration isn't until they come back to the Messiah, but this is meant to be a signal to the nations, it says in verse 12, and that he's gathering the dispersed of Judah for the four winds of the earth. And so here he is, he's gathering from the four corners of the earth, he's gathering them to Israel. If you go back to that passage in Zechariah 10:10, I want you to focus on this phrase, and I'll bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon, till there's no room found for them. Well, for those that don't know, Gilead is on the eastern side of the Jordan River. That has not fully happened yet. When that happens is an interesting question. And the other question is, and to Lebanon. Is it talking about Israel taking Lebanon, or is it to the borders of Lebanon? And that's another question. But the point is that it's not quite happened yet. It's not fully happened. Verse 10 and 11 is very interesting. It says, "And he shall pass through the seas of troubles and strike down the waves of the sea, and all of the depths of the Nile shall be dried up." This is a physical sign. The Nile River shall be dried up. If you actually are paying attention, the rivers around the world are drying up. This is an article in Al Monitor that monitors the Middle East, and it talks about the Nile River drying up. This is another article in agency France Press talking about, hey, the Nile River is drying up. We're seeing the Euphrates River dry up. We're seeing the major rivers in Europe drying up. We're seeing the Colorado River drying up. And for those that don't understand the significance of the drying up of the Nile River, I suggest you watch a video I put together called Raiders of the Lost Ark, Solomon's Lost Treasure, and the Ethiopian Dam. I really go into detail in this particular video about the drying up of the Nile River, the connection to Solomon's treasure, and the connection to a temple being rebuilt. And so you have to kind of really pay attention to what's happening. But the point of the matter is this, that the verse 1 of Zechariah 10 says, "Ask rain from the Lord in the season of the spring rain." And if the spring rain here is an indication talking about the latter rain of Joel 2, talking about the early rain and the latter rain, then there's significant signs. There's signs in the physical realm, one of which is the drying up of the Nile River. So people ask me, is the revival, is the Great Awakening at Asbury a legitimate event? I think it's too early to tell, but the signs of it are very positive. And and one thing we should see, perhaps, and this is kind of connecting this to scripture, will we see the physical signs? And if we see the physical signs of the Nile River drying up, then we know that we're approaching this season of harvest. Right now we're looking at prophecy and it's sealed. I don't know if my interpretation is correct. I don't know if I just know that the words are sealed until the time of the end, that we weren't really supposed to fully understand everything. We're kind of looking through a glass darkly. And I say that with hesitancy about this passage, but the reason why I bring this up is so that you understand kind of what I'm looking at. As in physical signs that kind of give us an indication of when we enter into what I call this water breaking moment. I have another video talking about the water breaking moment, but for those that don't get a Worthy Brief, sign up for it. We send it out to 25,000 people a day. We cover what's happening around the world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the United States, and what's happening to believers. The great thing now is the ministry has grown. Now we have journalists in Jerusalem, Rome, Budapest, and throughout the United States. Thank you so much for supporting us financially. Obviously, we couldn't do it without the financial support. Right now, we are traveling all across the United States. As I put together this video, I'm getting ready to go to East Palestine to see what is happening with the train wreck there. Since we've been deployed to the United States, we have traveled over 130,000 miles now. And every time a major event takes place, for example, we were, within days from the George Floyd event, and we were in Minneapolis. We were in the middle of the Chaz and Chaz riots in Seattle. We were in the middle of the Antifa riots in Portland. Part of that is that I don't trust a whole lot of the news services anymore. And the only way to really determine what is real and what is false is to actually go and see. So, also, if you haven't gotten our app, this is really a great service that we provide for free. Not only do you get our Worthy News service, but at the bottom, if you actually click, you can actually get up-to-date news around the world, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the United States, and it's from all the different news services, and it's basically your one-stop shop for everything that's happening in the day. So thank you so much for listening. Um, this is George Whitten. I really hope you have a blessed week. The Lord is coming really, really soon. It's not time to cower and fear. It's time to recognize that you're kings and priests of the Most High, and it's time to rise up to your calling. God bless you. Have a great day, and please share this video.